That's why you get adrenal fatigue. Because if you're constantly under stress, your adrenals are working constantly, right? Thinking that there's some stressful event and you get adrenal fatigue, right? The endocannabinoid system has a connection because it down regulates the HPA axis. So if you're overly, taxing that HPA axis and you're in fight or flight and cortisol is up, it just so happens that cannabinoids interacting with this endocannabinoid system down regulate that HPA axis in our fight or flight and helps calm some of that anxiety.
You're listening to the Live Life Longer show with Dan Voss, inspiring you to live longer through the cold, the hot, breathing, eating, and being nature. In this week's episode, my guest is Don McLaughlin, co-founder of PurePower, a functional supplement company that contains powerful natural ingredients proven to promote health, well-being, and balance. Don co-founded the company with his cousin, Sean McCabe, and the two of them co-authored the book Plants, Performance, and the Endocannabinoid System, 21st Century Sports Medicine. Don is a former trial lawyer turned wellness advocate who journeys into the world of how CBD and other potent plants are fueling a grassroots movement into the sports world, one that has broader implications for anyone looking to boost not only health and well-being, but also enhance performance and enjoyment in any area of life. Don is a father of three, author, wellness advocate, and ultra-endurance athlete. Don, welcome to the Live Life Longer show.
Dan, thanks so much for that very kind introduction, and I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for some of our conversation around the work you're doing with your company and the book that you have. I would love to hear a little bit more about your backstory. Former trial lawyer turned co-founder of a CBD company and author of a book about CBD. Tell us a little bit more of how that came to be.
Yeah, it's been quite a winding journey to get here, Dan. Over the last roughly 20 years, I'm in my early 50s, and I was trained formally as a lawyer on the fast track to law firm partnership in my earliest days as a lawyer. And I've just really chartered a path that felt most true to me along the way of my legal career. And, that led me to really go into areas of the law that resonated most with me, which most pertinent for this backstory is that it led me to become a corporate lawyer inside a large Fortune 200 that was wrapped up in the Enron Arthur Andersen debacle, legal fiasco. And that turned into for me, an opportunity to specialize in a particular area of the law, which was digital evidence related to investigations and lawsuits, because that's exactly what was going on with Enron and Arthur Andersen. And the corporation that I was an in-house lawyer in was, again, wrapped up in this with the Securities and Exchange Commission and then the Department of Justice. Long story short, it leads, Dan, to me founding a legal tech and services firm focused on essentially legal departments, primarily in the Fortune 500, to help them better manage electronic data for both risk and cost. And that was, a very exciting time, and that business really started to flourish. I founded it in 2007, but over several years, and then the 2008 financial crisis hit, I really started to burn out in a big way, a deep way. Had persistent anxiety, periods of depression for which, I was prescribed antidepressants, and they helped me in very hard moments, but they also seemed to be something that I couldn't get off of. And I, at the time, was misusing alcohol and just not in a real good spot. It ultimately led to me hitting my lowest spot in life in late 2012. In the midst of dozens of employees, multi-million-dollar business, very successful on the outside, but I was really suffering internally. And I knew that I had to make a significant change. The business was at risk because I was at risk, right? And that led me on a journey to overhaul my diet. It went more plant-based. And I really started to look at the ways in which I was, managing me. And in early 2013, a couple months into this recovery, I read an article in the Denver Post about this thing called hemp that has these medicinal and therapeutic properties, particularly with respect to stress and anxiety. And I was shocked when I read that it was non-psychoactive and legal, and it was related to cannabis. The reason I was so shocked is because I started my legal career as an assistant DA prosecuting cannabis crimes, and I had no idea there was something called hemp. And I wonder, why didn't I know this? And it sort of forced me to experiment. So I talked to the doctor that prescribed me the antidepressants, had been for years. She wasn't really of much help. So it really required me to experiment and really figure out what this was all about. And I started to experiment. You know, it was around the time of legalization in Colorado. And I soon discovered that something was happening as I took this hemp extract, this hemp oil, that now is widely just referred to as CBD, which I think is a disservice because that's just one of 100 plus cannabinoids that are in this hemp oil, right? That these cannabinoids link into this endocannabinoid system that is it's responsible for so many of our, for balancing so many of our major physiological functions. Yeah. And that just, again, sort of, you know, what I discovered right away was I slept more deeply. I was more calm. My anxiety was much, much lower. I weaned myself off of the antidepressants. I seemed to have a sort of calm focus. And at this same time, Dan, part of my journey too in recovery was I knew I needed to build more resilience. You know, there was great promise with this business, but it wasn't going to be realized if I didn't build increased resilience. And what did that look like for me? Movement practice, right? And so I got more serious about working out on a more regular basis. And as I did so, I discovered ultra endurance trail running. I read a magazine article. I was shocked that people were running 100 miles through the mountains. I thought that was inconceivable, but something clicked with me and I started to run in a way that I hadn't in my life before, right? I ran cross country track or cross country in high school. I was kicked off the team. That's how disinterested and bad a runner I was. But something in my early 40s really clicked, and I started, running longer distances. And in the midst of doing that, I discovered other herbs, other adaptogens, as they're known, right? Long used in traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, things like ashwagandha, turmeric, right? Cordyceps, these things that I read other athletes were using that I started to incorporate in my routine. So that's kind of, the backstory that leads up to, really diving into this world of super herbs and what they can do for us, whether in athletics or in everyday life.
What a neat story. There's a few things you talked about that I want to touch on. First off, kudos to you on the endurance, the ultra marathons. I've run 2 marathons in my life, and that's enough for me. I think 26.2 or I think it's 26.2 is more than enough. I don't know how people do more than that and how they get into the 50s or 100 miles. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff. And I guess my next follow-up question would be, what did you learn about yourself during that time of burnout and that transition period of your career? Because I've been there before in terms of burnout and transitioning careers. I think, a lot of my listeners may have been there as well. What would you say is the number one lesson you learned about yourself during all this transformation?
Yeah, great question, Dan. It's seemingly an easy question, but not, right? It's multidimensional. For me, though, I think a couple of the hallmarks, I was out of alignment with myself, with my business, and I was just, sort of hanging on because I think at some level I knew that there was just this disconnect with the way I was living my life and what was going on internally. And for me specifically, it was, as an entrepreneur in a rapidly growing business, the pursuit of more, right, and the growth of the business can become the sole focus. And that was one aspect of misalignment that took me away from the very reason that I started the business to begin with, which was to help clients solve problems. And then also just physically, right? And I would say even, mentally and spiritually, I was also out of alignment, right? I was just sort of propped up by caffeine all day, every day, working kind of nonstop, grinding, even as the business grew, trying to do it all, right?
Yeah.
I think often, when you're accomplished and you have done things, you think, well, the best way to do it if you want something done right is to do it yourself. But that only works so long. And so that was probably the biggest realization, right? That I was out of alignment, that I needed to get back in alignment. And I will say that I can't take full responsibility for this, right? It was a combination of grace and grit. When I hit this low moment, November 3rd, 2012, something came over me, right? And just shifted my perspective completely from one in which I was exhausted, burned out, cynical, just really just burned out, right? Yep. Disengaged, to completely re-engaged in a way I'd never been before, fueled by an overwhelming sense of gratitude for life and for my family and for my team and our clients. And, everything started to flourish again in a way that I just couldn't have anticipated.
Wow. So much of what you're saying resonates with me. I've been in moments of life where I have been burnt out, or even just in recent history within the last year or so, not feeling aligned to my core values in my life and who I am as a person, and letting the rat race of life take over, especially pre-COVID. If you think back, I know it's hard to imagine, but pre-COVID, much of our world was just very fast-paced and very task-oriented, and you go from meeting to meeting, and you always have projects you're working on, and you're working late nights and starting early mornings, and it was a very kind of chaotic world in the sense of work and overdrive. And I definitely fell into that. And within the last year or so, I've discovered what cannabis and CBD can do and the power that it has, and it's allowed me to slow things down. And you mentioned there's that like kind of calm focus. I have a CBD product I enjoy. It's a blend of reishi mushroom, lion's mane, and the CBD oil, and it's just this really nice blend of calmness, but then also clarity and focus. And for me, that's been a big game changer. So I'm happy to hear that you've had a similar experience.
Yes, it's I think in both respects, culturally, right, this American idea of self-reliance and self-determinism in certain respects gone amok, right? Leading up to COVID, I still appreciate that, and I've lived it. I'm sort of exhibit A in legalese. Yes, this combination of different herbs and minerals, fundamental minerals, right? Things like magnesium, that we're just not getting in our diets like we once did. It's just simply not in the soil, and therefore it's not in the food that's grown in that soil in the same way it was historically. And so, PurePower grew out of my personal experience, but then my cousin, Sean McCabe, he suffered a traumatic brain injury in late 2015. And so I had now been a couple of years into this recovery period of experimentation as well. And, he was in ICU. They didn't know whether he was going to survive. Collapsed lung, bleed in the brain. Wow. And about 4 months into his rehab, which was complete in the sense of he couldn't ride a bike. He couldn't do a push-up. He was, starting from literally ground zero again. And about 4 months into his recovery, I suggested to him that he might want to incorporate both hemp oil and then over time a couple of other adaptogens. And he was open to it. And so what he found was he started to sleep more deeply, consistently, which in a brain injury is solution number one, right? To help the brain heal, it requires deep, restful sleep. And he found that. more consistently than certainly what he'd been prescribing, right? And also his anxiety around his condition.
Mm-hmm.
Here he was, MBA from Michigan, super successful in the wind industry over a long period of time, doing major multi-million dollar projects. And he was back living with his parents because he had to rehab, right? And so just that anxiety was another hallmark for him. And so to sort of bring it full circle, the business that I founded and was running, that I had this, experience of transformation in the midst of, it grew rapidly, it flourished, and ultimately we had several companies desire to acquire it. I sold it, and in the process of sort of phasing out of that company, I was feeling into what was next. And what was very obvious was in my suitcase as I traveled around the country, in the midst of integrating my business into this larger business. And what was in my suitcase were 15 different bottles of different things that I was taking, from cordyceps to ashwagandha to ginger to all these different things, right? And at the time, I had seen a homeopath, so I had some guidance around what I was doing, and I was doing more and more research, right? And so as I phased out of that business, I shared with Sean that I was thinking, no one else is incorporating these various herbs and minerals with hemp oil, with hemp extract, and that I felt like there was something magnified in combining them, right? Because I had taken CBD for a while by itself, and then I started to incorporate other things that I had some experience with before. And I just noticed a bigger impact, right? Both in my running, in my recovery, and also just professionally, right?
Yeah.
And so that really planted the early seeds of PurePower, premised on the idea that if the body is supported, the body and brain are supported, right, in a way that that balance can be restored, that you can significantly improve your quality of health, your quality of life, and your performance as an athlete, as a professional. And that's really at the heart of PurePower.
Wow. That's so cool. Yeah. Hemp is just a remarkable plant. You alluded to earlier that there might be some confusion around, what the hemp plant is, what hemp oil is, what CBD is. Is it similar to THC? Is it going to get me high? What is the endocannabinoid system?
Yes.
So can you explain a little bit more, maybe starting off with what the endocannabinoid system is, and then, what's the difference between, hemp-derived CBD and hemp oil? Maybe just kind of give some clarification around those topics.
Sure, happy to. I will just say, though, that, coming from a lawyer that's worked in the Fortune 500 and been in the criminal arena, right, it is interesting that hemp, as I said, when I read that first article, it was shocking, right? There's this big stigma around cannabis, understandably for social and public health reasons, and also just confusion, right? Hemp was widely cultivated around the world and in the U.S. prior to World War II, and even during World War II, the government advocated farmers grow it. But let me talk about the endocannabinoid system, and then we could circle back to that, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So the endocannabinoid system, a fascinating discovery really in the late 80s and early 90s. So not that long ago that science and medicine discovered it in connection with trying to understand what were the health impacts of cannabis generally, right? That was really the search that led to the discovery of cannabis. And cannabis is that's the genus, right? Just like tomato, right? There's tomato, but there's a variety of different tomatoes, right? Cannabis, there's a variety, right? And there's two primary ones, marijuana and hemp, right? As they're referred to. Marijuana is the plant that has big flowers that tend to be very high concentration of the chemical called, that's known as THC, right? It's psychoactive, and it shows up in high concentrations in the marijuana plant. In the hemp plant, completely different. That's just not the case. It's grown for industrial agricultural purposes, for textile. It doesn't contain those high concentrations of THC, but what it does contain is this rich profile of what's referred to as cannabinoids. And the reason that matters from a health perspective is it goes back to the endocannabinoid system. While science and medicine discovered that this endocannabinoid system, what it is, it consists of these receptors at the cellular level that are highly concentrated in certain areas of the brain and the body. And it just so happens they're tied very closely to major physiological functions, right? The central nervous system, some major physiological functions. And what these receptors do is they, in essence, and I'm going to oversimplify this just for purpose of our discussion, they enhance cell-to-cell communication. And in that way, help the body get back to balance more quickly. And, there's a lot of nuances with respect to CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors. But the point that I think is most important is that this endocannabinoid system, if not attended to, it definitely can cause a degradation of major physiological functions inside the body. And said differently, if the endocannabinoid system is supported, it can enhance the functioning of major physiological systems. Let me give you one example, right? Anxiety, right? Anxiety, number one condition among college students in the United States, bar none, right? By an order of magnitude. It just so happens the endocannabinoid system has a role to play with respect to anxiety. Why? Fight or flight, right? We all know fight or flight, right? That's that, immediate sort of reaction we have. But we also know that we have this persistent level of fight or flight that's just very low grade, that's chronic stress, right? That also is tied with anxiety. Well, where does that fight or flight, reaction come from? What's called the HPA axis, the connection between the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenals, right? That axis, right? That's why you get adrenal fatigue. Because if you're constantly under stress, your adrenals are working constantly, right? Thinking that there's some stressful event and you get adrenal fatigue, right? The endocannabinoid system has a connection because it downregulates the HPA axis. So if you're overly taxing that HPA axis and you're in fight or flight and cortisol is up, it just so happens that cannabinoids interacting with this endocannabinoid system down-regulate that HPA axis in our fight or flight and helps calm some of that anxiety.
Hey guys, I want to take a quick second to tell you about Kion, which provides natural supplements and clean coffee for vibrant health. Kion coffee is in the top 3% of all coffee grown worldwide that can claim to be specialty grade, which means it's free from yeast, pesticides, mold, and mycotoxins. It's also one of the best cups of coffee I've ever had. Kion also has a really great aminos product that aids in better sleep, post-exercise recovery, provides fast, clean energy, supports fasting, and improves cognitive performance. Experience the energy and performance benefits of Kion Aminos today. To get 15% off your order of Kion coffee or any of their products and supplements, visit getkion.com/danvoss and enter code DANVOSS, that's DANVOSS, at checkout for 15% off your order. That makes sense. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And I can feel that as I am consuming CBD. I can feel that kind of being regulated, right? That balance. I think you mentioned that word balance before. I can definitely sense that. That makes sense. Now, what about the difference between hemp and CBD? Are they the same thing, or what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, great question. So hemp is the plant. The oil that comes from certain parts of the hemp plant are rich in these cannabinoids. And there's over 100 cannabinoids that have been identified. One of them has held the most promise in terms of its impacts, and that is CBD, right? But there are a whole host of other cannabinoids, right? Some of which are starting to show up in the literature and study around things like CBA and CBG and CBN that may offer promise with respect to specific conditions, right? Now, having said that, I think that in the U.S. and certainly in Colorado and states like Washington that were sort of early proponents of cannabis, um, there's I think there's been a rush in certain respects to just grab right onto CBD. Like
Right.
CBD is sort of this quick fix cure all, which there's no question in my experience, my cousin's experience, it does provide great benefit. The danger, though, I think, is isolating in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of, a lot of the products that have come up on the market have been CBD isolate, where
Mm-hmm.
the oil that I talked about that has these 100 plus cannabinoids has been processed and cut and processed and cut and processed and cut and almost distilled down to this powder that is just the CBD, right? And that CBD isolate is used in a lot of products. Why? Because, there's some comfort of, I only want CBD. I only want this one thing, and I don't want any THC, anything, because in hemp oil, there is residual, very de minimis amounts of THC. So it
Mm-hmm.
led to this push of just CBD. Well, the danger with that in certain respects is it's not really a danger. It's just science is now showing, there's several studies, that the sum is greater than the parts, that
Mm-hmm.
full spectrum, as it's referred to, all of the cannabinoids just work more effectively than isolating on one, which again has been CBD. So for us at PurePower, it's been full spectrum right from the start,
Got it.
because again, the sum is greater than the parts, and the synergy between those cannabinoids seems to do something, because that's what science is bearing out.
Got it. So when you say full spectrum hemp oil, that's containing all of the cannabinoids, including CBD and some of the others that you had mentioned, correct?
Correct.
Got it.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Correct.
And what about some of the research and discoveries around the other cannabinoids outside of CBD? Are those starting to come to fruition? Are we starting to learn more about what these other cannabinoids can do for us?
Yes, we certainly are. There are increasingly focus around CBN, for example, for sleep, right, as an
Mm,
enhancement to sleep. CBA, CBG. There are a variety of others that I think just again hold promise. Again, I think
mm-hmm.
that the world of cannabinoid therapy, as it's known in certain circles, is
Mm-hmm.
just emerging, and I think that certainly as I anticipate this, right. I think it's happening already as major players in nutritional supplements, in nutraceuticals, and also in pharmaceuticals. They're going to start, really, they already are, right, digging
Yeah.
into, okay, what can be used for this or that. And I think in many respects that can be very beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Although, from my perspective, in terms of just approaching health holistically, uh,
Yep.
I think one of the reasons we find ourselves in the condition we do today, where the United States is using 70% of the world's pharmaceuticals, is because everything's been parsed out and pieced out to deal with this, and then you got to take this to deal with this, and then you got to take this to deal with this.
Mm.
I think that a holistic approach, right, is the key. And for us at PurePower, it's not about CBD, right? Again, CBD is very beneficial, but a couple things. One is, as I've alluded to, it's not as effective as full spectrum oil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Several studies have shown that. Coupled with the fact that when you take CBD, in my experience, and I think others as well, and you just take CBD and you take it consistently over time, you start taking more of it, because
Mm.
you're just relying on one thing, right, as
Yeah.
somewhat of a band aid. Whereas if you supported the body more holistically, right, you could avoid that essentially, right. And for us, the way in which we use CBD and the other cannabinoids in full spectrum hemp oil, we're using them as a catalyst to deepen the impacts of the other herbs in our products, right?
Mm.
Full spectrum oil is a great way to just nourish the receptors, but then really to get the biggest impact, we're using CBD as this Trojan horse,
Mm.
because we're combining it with other herbs and minerals that, when taken together, the sum is greater than the parts, and there's this synergistic impact that has been long known in traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, and that really is the heart of PurePower. It's
Yeah.
combining these things based on this millennia of knowledge about how these things can really support things like deep sleep, right? Sustained energy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
endurance, more rapid recovery. So you're not feeling sore all the time, right? And you're detoxing more rapidly. So
Yep.
that's the way in which, our approach at PurePower, I think, is substantially different. And certainly we launched at the end of 2018. And that idea of the synergies between the various things, oh my God, no one was doing that. It was just
Yeah.
CBD, CBD. Now you talked about, you got one with Reishi and Lion's Mane,
Yeah.
and you see other products coming out of the market because I think they saw, they're seeing what we saw, which is, okay, wow, the sum is greater than the parts. Something is
Yep.
happening here, even though science may not be there to show, that CBD is this, or cannabinoids are this magnifier.
Mm.
Clearly, something is happening, and you see it starting to develop in the industry and taking the approach that we took.
It's so interesting. I've heard people that enjoy or take CBD. They, like you said, over time, if they're taking it every single day, that tolerance is built up. Over time, they're having more. They need more and more and more. Um, and then they find that, okay, maybe I'll take a few days off or a week off and kind of reset. Does that same thing apply with full spectrum hemp oil? Is there that same kind of effect that the more you
Yes,
take,
yes, yes,
it just, yeah.
and honestly, Dan, it applies to ashwagandha.
Okay.
It applies to cordyceps. It applies to lion's mane. I
Yeah.
think that, and at PurePower, we tell our customers 30 days on consistently, day after day, stop for 5 to 7 days,
Got
right?
it.
Don't take our products for 5 to 7 days. And what
Yeah.
that allows is, right, it allows everything that you've consumed over the last 30 days really to assimilate and also
Mm,
to let the body reset, right? So
got
that
it.
when you reincorporate them into your nutritional plan, they're going to serve their purpose to the maximum, right? So
Mm,
yeah, it's absolutely the case. Whether it's full spectrum hemp oil, CBD, these other herbs, allowing the body to reset and just giving it that opportunity is for us that's part of the program. That's the way in
yep.
which we see our team of pro athletes have these incredible results, and they seemingly don't hit these plateaus that they have in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's helpful to know. You've discussed a few of the benefits that we can get from cannabinoids. You talked about stress and anxiety, deeper sleep. Um, you mentioned energy and endurance for athletes. Can you talk a little bit more about how phytocannabinoids provide that potent energy and endurance for athletes? And then I'd also like to hear a little bit more. I don't think we've talked about inflammation and how it can help beat inflammation. So maybe you can start off with that energy and endurance piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to, Dan. So, um, cannabinoids, science is now showing. You used a term there that I just want your listeners to appreciate: phytocannabinoids, which maybe you've talked about before, but cannabinoids derived from plants, phytocannabinoids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cannabinoids come from plants, and then the way in which those plant-derived cannabinoids support energy is again at the cellular level. This is where these receptors reside in the
Mm.
endocannabinoid system. And what science has shown is that these receptors inside the cell, they are connected with mitochondria. Well, what are
Mm.
mitochondria? Mitochondria are little batteries inside our cells that create energy, ATP, right?
Mm.
Through ATP, we're animated as individuals, right? Mitochondria and ATP, that's a direct correlation with what kind of energy we have in life, right? And as we age, mitochondria are not as robust, and mitochondrial function is compromised as we age, or other factors compromise mitochondrial function.
Mm.
Poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, right? Why is it that we see, particularly in this country, a lot of people struggle with energy, right? Well, it's because a combination of nutrition and lifestyle,
Yep.
right? If you're sedentary and you have a poor energy rich diet, you're going to have low energy, and your your immune function is going to be compromised. All those things. So
Yep.
it really, that's the importance of mitochondria, and cannabinoids happen to enhance mitochondrial function, right? Both the creation of new mitochondria and just the cycling of mitochondria that are dying, right? Enhancing that whole energy production cycle at the cellular level. So that's the key connection between cannabinoids and energy, right? And endurance.
Got it.
And then, you can factor it in, you can amplify that with things like cordyceps, long known for its energy enhancing properties, right? And endurance. And most recently for us, we've gone into our second upgrade of our formulations into NAD boosters, which is a whole new world that's only recently been talked about. But that has to do with oxygen assimilation and generation within the body. That as we age, what aging is the process of not processing oxygen as well as one once did when we were younger.
Yep.
So we've incorporated NAD boosters for that very reason. So that's the energy topic. Hopefully that helps. Yep. I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah, very helpful.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful.
Okay, great. And
I will say one quick thing on that. I do find it just in terms of myths or misconceptions or stigma. I find it so interesting that it does help with energy and endurance. When a lot of people think they hear the term, I know we're talking about hemp, but they might hear cannabis in general and think that it's going to make you lazy and sluggish. And yes, that might be the case for a lot of people if we're talking about, let's say, THC. But with full spectrum hemp and cannabinoids in general, I just find that fascinating that it's actually giving us energy and endurance.
Yeah.
So
yes, and it's something that was long known. If you go back, so long in traditional Chinese medicine, hemp was known as this master adaptogen. Well, what the hell is adaptogen? Adaptogen is that these plant substances, these herbs, adapt to what is going on inside the human body in a way that probably reflects the fact that we've been living on plants and everything out in nature for so long that there's this intimate connection, and they adapt. Meaning, if you're sluggish, they may lift you up. If you're inflamed, they're going to address that area. They kind of just find what's needed inside the body and, again, restore balance so that the body can work in the miraculous way that it does, right? And that ties right into inflammation. Very, very similar, right? Persistent chronic inflammation is the great problem that is tied to hypertension and, probably the top 3 leading causes of death. Inflammation is the common denominator, right? And cannabinoids, by restoring this balance, allow the body to use inflammation in the way it should be, right, for acute recovery from acute injuries, but help down-regulate this persistent inflammation, right? And that also, this is where detox is often not alluded to, but I think so important to inflammation, because if you can detox the body just through cycling through dead cells and other elements that contribute to inflammation, that's a way in which, these cannabinoids can help, again, sort of down-regulate inflammation so that you're not in this persistent inflamed state, and your body is, is closer to being in balance than, what persistent inflammation, just you're not in balance, right? You're out of balance.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I would say that's a really good definition of what inflammation is that imbalance in our health. And I see that myself with CBD in particular. I've had inflammation throughout my life, and that's just another benefit I've received from it, is that anti-inflammatory benefit. So I see it. I know others do. And it's just remarkable. I mean, the more you're talking about just the hemp plant in general, it's just screaming at me how incredible of a plant it is.
Yeah, and so much yet to learn, right? I mean,
yeah.
With respect to brain injuries, I read some research recommended to Sean, who had this traumatic, almost life-threatening, brain injury, and yet, anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective qualities that, there's some science there, but we're due for a lot more. And this
Mm.
plant in particular, I think holds so much promise for so much of what ails us. All right.
Yep.
And for us, there's an element of this that ties into agriculture, because hemp cultivated more widely can help replenish and restore soils that have been depleted over several generations through
Mm.
chemical traditional agriculture. So that's a separate topic, but I think very important because it ties back,
Yeah.
to what we're consuming.
Yeah. It's so true. Yeah. There's so much there on just the production of hemp and really the legality around it. Like you said, it's been. What'd you say in the beginning of the conversation? It was around World War II or before World War II that there was massive
Yes.
production.
Yeah, 1937 is when hemp was outlawed.
Yep.
And, there's a variety of, theories about why that was. Certainly it was connected directly with marijuana. But then
Mm.
during World War II, there was this period in which the government encouraged farmers to grow it more widely for
Yep.
rope and other, industrial purposes. But then, it fell back into disfavor after the
Mm.
war, and then certainly, since that time, right, 50s, 60s, 70s, the war on drugs, hemp was just a footnote as a Schedule One substance on the same
Mm.
classification as heroin
Wow.
forever until until really only most recently that hemp has been fully declassified as a Schedule One substance.
Mm.
And again, I think we're just at the at the start of
Yeah.
what it can do for us.
Right. Yeah, it's promising. I think a lot of what we're discovering and some of the movements that are taking place, it's definitely promising to see where things are going, what we're learning. There's still so much more to learn, but I do think we're at least heading in the right direction around that topic.
Yes, yes, and you see it in other countries that
Hmm.
that are they're seeking to import large amounts of hemp for health purposes in particular. And so, yeah, I think there's great promise. And again, back to our conversation, our earlier conversation, that is not a quick fix cure all.
Right.
We advocate this with our PurePower customers and just our community, right? This is not pill popping. This is not the
Yep.
quick fix cure all, right? We've been doing that for decades,
Mm.
right? This is about a holistic approach to health that it just so happens we believe in PurePower in particular. There's these combinations that restore balance, enhance energy, accelerate recovery, deepen sleep, the fundamentals of health, that when you approach that, you're going to stick with your yoga. You're going to work out more. Why? You feel better and you want more
Mm.
of it. And the body
Yes.
just starts to take over, and, we become stronger and we have more
Yep.
vitality.
Yes. I love that. I think that a good segue into my last question I have for you, Don. And knowing that you have your story of health transformation and even for your cousin Sean, having that journey of going through some tough battles around health and getting onto, the other side, if you will. What does health mean to you now that you've been through what you have been through, burnout and going down the wrong path on all kinds of areas of health? And then, like I said, now on the other side of realizing that holistic health approach, what would you say, health means to you?
Uh, it may sound a little bit cliche or Pollyanna, a Hallmark card perhaps, but health to me is really the appreciation of life in its most basic form. I think that through my ultra endurance adventures and just pushing my body and brain beyond the point at where I thought I could go, I've discovered that this vehicle that we walk around in day to day, I've just come to appreciate it so much more as something that I didn't create, that I inherited, that
Mm.
has, it's the most sophisticated technology that we have. And I think to pay attention to one's health is an acknowledgement and a celebration of, the life that animates us. And for me personally, almost a feeling of an obligation in ways that I haven't felt before to care for it, because, again, it's the vehicle through which, I'm living my life.
Wow. So well put. I love that answer. That's awesome. Don, this has been a real joy to chat with you. Where can people learn more about you, the work you're doing, and about PurePower?
I appreciate that, Dan. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and diving into this conversation, which I've enjoyed so much. The best place is on the PurePower front is Live PurePower. LivePurePower.com is our
Mm-hmm.
web URL, and we've got lots of resources there, and certainly information about our products and what others are experiencing with it. On social media, we're at PurePower Life on Instagram and Facebook. And then for me personally, Don McLaughlin Jr. Don McLaughlin, McLaughlin Jr. on Instagram and Facebook. And I would say I'll leave this for your audience. Anybody that's interested in perhaps trying PurePower, a code to use, PurePower15 at livepurepower.com, 15% off a purchase of PurePower to really give it a try.
Awesome. That's great. I'll have that all linked up, and folks can head over there and check it out.
Great, Dan.
Excellent. Don, thanks so much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.